Now we're going to look at how to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So any quadratic equation can be solved by completing the square. And if you look at example 1 in your textbook, you'll see that they derive a formula called the quadratic formula by completing the square. So the quadratic formula says that if you have a quadratic equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a is not equal to 0, then x is going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This equation is the quadratic formula. So in order to use the quadratic formula, our equation has to be in the standard form, that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then you can determine the values of a, b, and c, and then substitute them into the quadratic formula. Let's look at an example. Let's say we want to use the quadratic formula to find the solution set for x squared plus 5x minus 6 equals 0. So in this quadratic equation, our a value is 1, our b value is 5, and our c value is negative 6. So using those values, we can substitute them into our quadratic formula. So instead of writing negative b, I'll write negative 5. Plus or minus the square root, instead of writing b, I will write 5 squared minus 4 times, instead of a, I'll write 1, and instead of c, I will write negative 6. All over 2 times, and instead of a, I'm going to write 1. From here, it's just simplification using order of operations. So the first thing I have to do is the inside of that radical. So I'll have to do 5 squared, which is 25, and then 4 times 1 times negative 6, which is negative 24. Now I'll take care of that 25 minus negative 24. And when I am subtracting integers, I'm adding the opposite. So it becomes 25 plus positive 24, which ends up being 49. So now I have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 2. The square root of 49 is actually 7. So that means I have negative 5 plus or minus 7 over 2. Now I'll get my two solutions. So negative 5 plus 7 over 2, which is equal to 1. Or negative 7 minus 7 over 2, which is equal to negative 6. So now I know what x is equal to. It's either equal to 1 or negative 6. And I can write that as a solution set by writing set brackets. So here are your steps for solving a quadratic equation. Your first step is to write the equation in the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form, the standard form. Next, identify values for a, b, and c, and then substitute those values into the quadratic formula and simplify. Let's look at another example. Let's use the quadratic formula to solve 3y squared minus 4y equals 8. So the first thing I have to do is put it in standard form. So I'll subtract 8 from both sides, and now I have 3y squared minus 4y minus 8 equals 0. Now I can identify my a, b, and c values. My a value is 3, my b value is actually negative 4, and my c value is actually negative 8. I'll take those values and substitute it into the quadratic formula. Now I have x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus negative 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 8 all over 2 times 3. Make sure that when you are squaring that negative 4, it's actually going to become positive 16 because a negative squared is positive. That negative 4 at the beginning becomes positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times 3 times negative 8 is negative 96 all over 6. So when I do 16 minus 96, that's the same as saying 16 plus 96, which is 112. So I have 4 plus or minus the square root of 112 over 6. So I have to simplify the square root of 112. It's not a perfect square, but it will reduce to 4 square roots of 7. From here, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my denominator as a denominator of each term. Actually, before that, let's go ahead and factor out a 2 from the 4's and rewrite 6 as 2 times 3. And the reason we want to do that is because that means that these 2's will cancel, leaving us 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 7 over 3.